Okay. Afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Nigel.
Um, for people that see this, could you give us a minute or so who you are, what you're up to, where you're ministering?
Thank you. So my name is Ian Fry. I'm the Associate Minister for Families at St Ebbe's Church in Oxford, which basically means I try to look after the spiritual well-being of the families and encourage them in nurturing their kids, but also link that with the youth and children's ministry that's run out of the church.
Okay. How long have you been there?
3.5 years.
Okay. We chatted last week on the phone about the current cultural moment we find ourselves in, and COVID-19, we're now in lockdown. And one of the reflections I asked your opinion on was, this is a timely moment for the church, Christian families, to remember that the primary locality for discipleship is in the home. And we got talking a little bit about family worship and what that might look like. For people that haven't thought about it perhaps as much as you have, what is family worship? How would you describe it?
Well, the Bible treats the family as a kind of mini church with the father pastoring the family members. So the father acts like a shepherd, really,
Yes.
caring for the spiritual well-being of his kids and his wife, teaching them the Bible, praying for them, praying with them, encouraging them to think Christianly about life. But that's done as a complement to what's already happening in the church. So his pastoral oversight isn't meant to in any way kind of challenge the pastoral oversight provided by an eldership in a local church or rector or vicar or whatever church you're in.
Where's this idea come from? Is this something that you've thought up, or is this part of a bigger tradition or a bigger idea?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not a new idea. If you go right back to the early church fathers, a chap called Chrysostom focused a lot of his teaching on the family. And then at the time of the Reformation, Luther especially wrote about the family being like a little church.
Yes.
And that was built on by the Puritans in massive detail, as you can imagine. And then jump forward to the 19th century, and you've got the Princeton theologians in the States and people like J.C. Ryle and C.H. Spurgeon sounding the same note. And today you'd have preachers such as John MacArthur and John Piper encouraging families, and especially dads, to fulfill their God-given calling.
Yes. So if there's this tradition that we could go back and look up, how did it get lost in the modern church? What happened?
Do you know, I'm not exactly sure, but I have a couple of ideas. I think one is the advent of Sunday schools, and I think the other is the increasing state education. So let me talk about, first of all, the Sunday school. I mean, Sunday schools, as originally set up by Robert Raikes in Gloucester, were for the poor children, such as those working in the factories. And when those closed on the Sabbath, then the children were idle. And so Raikes conceived of an educational scheme for these children to teach basic literacy and numeracy, along with, of course, the scriptures. So they were never intended to be for children of believing families particularly, and always had a kind of outward focus. And then by the early 1900s, that's all changed, with the Sunday school movement attracting an army of volunteers and Sunday schools numbering literally hundreds of thousands. And initially these ran before or sometimes after the normal Sunday morning service, but then slowly they transitioned to running in parallel with the morning service. Mm-hmm. And it was only, it seems to me, then a short step for families to begin to rely on the Sunday school to be the prime and sometimes exclusive place for the spiritual nurturing of their children. Mm-hmm. And I think the second factor, the state education, just furthered the distance between parents and their children's learning. Increasingly, parents became de-skilled in teaching their young.
You've mentioned dads twice, not exclusively dads, but you mentioned dads twice. What if there was a dad who's become a Christian or has been a Christian for a while and is hearing this challenge to regain some ground? How would you encourage them? What would you want them to hear if they wanted to, before we think practically, but before we think of examples, what would you want a dad to hear if time has been lost?
Well, I think the first thing is to not allow the guilt to dog you. If time has been lost, then it is important to acknowledge that. And there's no point in denying the reality. But then trusting God that now this challenge is coming at this time, or maybe it's a reminder of previous challenges, then determine with God's help to start and to make a start sooner rather than later.
Yes.
I think for a young dad, a young Christian dad, it's just a great opportunity to add something else to your discipleship and to go forward with your wife and your children together.
Okay, so let's get practical. What would that look like? We've got some work coming down the line from our schools at the moment, but there's lots of space in the margins of the day. What would you say? Paint us a picture of what family worship might look like.
Well, let me start by recommending a resource that many people don't know about, but it's a superb little book called Together with God by Ed McKenzie and Gareth Crispin.
Yes.
And the beauty of this little book, which you can get on Amazon, is that actually it just has stories from different families about how they do family worship. And the beauty of that is that there is the variety there. So for some families, it's short and more manageable because of their circumstances. For others, they can give it longer time. So I'd really recommend that as a kind of go-to resource, Together with God by Ed McKenzie and Gareth Crispin.
Yes.
But in terms of doing it, I think you just start simply. I think one of the, as I look back at my own failed fathering in this area, I have to confess, was that I think I had very high standards. And as soon as those standards were kind of challenged, which they will be with children, then I kind of just got frustrated and gave up. I think just start small. Just start by opening a Bible together with your kids and reading. Maybe one of the Gospels would be a good place to start, or Old Testament stories. I mean, 70% of the Old Testament is story. So start with something that would be easily accessible for the children. There are plenty of resources out there, such as what I've already mentioned. Let me just add a few more, if I may.
Please do.
If you Google Truth 78, Family Discipleship for Starters, there's some very good ideas there. Also, check out Marty Mikowski's Old Story New and Long Story Short, which I know Gareth Edwards at Chessington has used a lot. And then, of course, there's the New City Catechism. Yeah. So all these resources are there. But I think the main thing is not to be overwhelmed with those or to set unrealistic goals. Just start small. Yeah. And I would have said in the past with people's normal working week, sometimes it might be good to just say, do it on a Saturday. Just get in the habit and build from there.
Yes.
So that would be my sort of initial thoughts.
So this model of it's not all about the family or not all about the church or not all about youth work, but there is a three-legged stool, someone said, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
And yet here's an opportunity in lockdown at the moment to prop up one leg
yes.
or to realize the opportunity there is in the home.
Yes.
That's been really helpful. Thanks for your time. God bless you and all that's going on at St. Ebbe's.
Thank you. God bless you too.
Thanks, Ian. Bye-bye.